My name is Reverend Dr. Finley C. Campbell, and this is my family tree story, focusing on how my family, in its own small way, helped to defeat white supremacy culture in the 20th century and in the present time reflected in me. My mother's name was Pauline J. Finley, became Campbell when she married my dad. She had a Cherokee ancestor, her grandfather's grandmother, and called simply the Indian woman. She got captured and sold into slavery when she came out of what was called the Cherokee Hills in South Carolina. She was eventually bought by my white Irish ancestor, a slave master, who fell in love with her and set her up as his concubine. And from that concubinage came the John Finley, that was my grandpa, line of the family. During the Jubilee time, my white Irish slave mastering ancestor gave land to the Finley family, and it was on that land that my mother was born in 1915. Unfortunately, my grandfather committed a terrible sin. He covered up the body of a young Black man who had been lynched, and as a result of that act of charity, lost over 150 acres of land. And they had to move to Asheville, North Carolina, where my mother came of age. She was the baby of the family and therefore had many, many advantages, specifically having the opportunity to become a teacher, a social justice activist, and marrying my father. She was a part of what was called the Talented 10th, which was a mix of being of an elite education, light skin, and having a little more opportunities than the average Black person would have had back in the 20th century. So she had a combination of noblesse oblige to the lower orders, as she would say, and a certain contempt for those who were too ignorant, quote, as she would say, to learn how to do anything. Later, as a part of my father's pastorage, she helped to set up a program in Anderson, South Carolina in the 1941. I remember this very well. One of the first Black groups at our church and in community to take part in the segregated Anderson County Fair. And that was our first experience in breaking the color barrier. Later, when they moved to Detroit, and I went along with them since I was a kid at the time, they left Anderson, South Carolina, part of the migration, and came to a little one-room church, just literally like a box on a corner. And thanks to her work, she began to transform the members of that church, mainly working class Black people, into what she was trying to do, make them more cultural. She conducted Messiah concerts and the Mikado, and eventually put together a group of people to take them around the world. These are Black folks who had never even left Detroit that much, except to go down south to visit family. So that was my mom. My dad was a sharecropping guy. He was a muler. That is a person who handled mules. He had 2 mules that he would rent out to do plowing in the neighborhood with other people. At the age of 18, he went to elementary school, decided he wanted to get an education. He felt he was called by God to be a preacher. And by age of 21, he had graduated high school and he eventually married his first wife, his teacher, a little older than him, of course. Her name was Miss Beulah, and had a daughter and a son by her. By the way, she was the daughter of a landholder, another major landholder. There's a certain amount of economic independence in my background. He went to Morris College, Benedict College, got his divinity degree from Howard University, and became the minister at St. Paul Baptist Church in Anderson, South Carolina. And was a part of a group of ministers who were in contact with the powerful Democratic Party of South Carolina. I remember meeting the governor of South Carolina, Governor Perry, just walking down the street and met my father and said hello to him. So his job was to be a negotiator between the Black community and the white power structure. Eventually moved to Detroit, Michigan again, and brought with him his whole attitude of education transformation and growth, and took this little church on a corner, like I said earlier, and made it into a multifunctional, big church with a lot of influence in the community, set up the Wolverine State Convention, and also was very much committed to education and transformation of this group of people, that his church, and eventually became a 500, 600 person church. The family together in Detroit took part in the desegregation process. Now, Detroit was semi-segregated in 43 when we arrived there. So it became a family affair to make some changes in that Detroit circumstance. So here were some of the things that happened. First, my mother helped to desegregate the Hudson downtown department store, worked with a group called CORE. My father joined the Michigan Council of Churches, and they worked to open up housing so that many Black members of our congregation eventually were able to buy housing beyond the so-called ghetto barrier. My brother, Major, helped to continue the desegregation of the Washington Postal Service, and eventually became a member of the U.S. American, I call it CIA operation of Radio Free Europe. He helped to organize their communication system with Eastern Europe. My brother Russell worked in the Atlanta struggle to desegregate Atlanta and successfully helped that to occur. And my brother Tony became the first Black preaching teacher, I guess you would call it that, preacherology or something of that nature at Boston University, and also the first Black visiting professor of preaching at Oxford University. And of course, my sister helped to open up the police department in Detroit, Michigan, becoming one of the first Black women to be a part of the department. And my big brother, TC, helped to desegregate the Detroit Street Railway, as it was called at that time, DSR, with others. So we were always somehow involved in the struggle. We all involved in the struggle to open up those doors. And of course, I was the first full-time Black professor at Wabash College in Crawfordsville, Indiana, and the first part-time lecturer at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. Now, with this kind of a background of struggle and participation, we certainly do not represent the entire nature of the Black history, but we're part of the leadership segment of that Black history. The ones who had to, as Du Bois said, open the doors and so that others could come through. And that was a deep commitment to social service in our work. We were nevertheless a little bit snobbish about the lower orders, the lower class folks. We used to call some people the beggars in the basement. That showed a sort of a class prejudice that existed in the Black community. If I were to say anything about what I learned from this history, going all the way back to my Cherokee ancestor who came down out of the hills just to see what was going on in the world below, and my father who started off as a muleteer and he eventually ended up as the head of the Russell Street Baptist Church, it is this: multiracial Unitarian Universalism grows out of that philosophy, that we do not look at white people as some kind of superpower. They were people you worked with when you could, opposed them when you had to. And the point was their so-called white supremacy culture was utterly and totally destroyed. I look forward to the time in my modest work with the Unitarian Universalist Multiracial Unity Action Council to make the concept of neo-racism a better explanation of the continuation of institutionalized racism than the term white supremacy. And I hope that the word multiracial Unitarian Universalism, a concept that I helped to develop, will eventually replace the concept of inclusion, diversity, inclusion, diversity, and equity as a much more broadly encompassing concept, because it would include white folks as a major part of that reality, and begin to see white folks as also victims of anti-Black racism. This is one thing I learned living both during the period of segregation and during this period of a desegregated culture. This then is my family history. My name is Reverend Dr. Finley C. Campbell.